This podcast is a project of the Medina Focus, with the goal of providing space for collaboration and community among practitioners to the Muslim diaspora in North America. As people around the world have immigrated to the West, many Christians have realized that they live and work in the midst of the nations, and they often feel alone and unprepared to communicate cross-culturally. If you're looking for conversation and community surrounding issues of loving Muslim friends in Jesus' name, we welcome you into the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Brian and Nate here as your hosts. Today we have a great topic. We're talking about international students. And so the United States has one of the largest international student population in the world. I think that's probably largely due to the respect that American degrees have in other countries. And just to put a number on this for you, we have almost 700,000 international students in the U.S. Now, this is a pre-COVID number. I know it took a dive based on some of the students that had to leave during COVID. That's unfortunate, and I think they're going to make a bounce back. I think our guests today are actually going to fill us in a little bit on some of that. But the interesting thing for those of us who are into the Medina focus side of things, the Muslim focus side of things, is that there's nearly 100,000 students in that 700,000 number. There's almost 100,000 students who are from Muslim majority countries. And so that's a fascinating thing to think about when you think about students who are here for 4 years and on a student visa and have to go back or have to transfer visa types. They have to go back home. You know, what is the potential for us to meet literally hundreds of thousands of students around the world, sometimes students from hard to reach places, and either they themselves are able to go back with the gospel or are able to bring us back in as their friends who help them out from the United States. And so I think very regularly about that almost 100,000 number of students from Muslim majority countries. Today we have three very special guests with us. We have Jonathan and Liz, who have been working with international students through Chi Alpha Campus Ministries for 15 years. They've met students from 80 countries, including many Muslim friends from Muslim majority countries. We are also joined by Jake, who is married, and they have 3 boys, and they live in Tempe, along with a lot of other international students down there. He leads a missional community that is intentional in reaching the nations in their neighborhood. He's on staff at Central Christian Church in the Phoenix area, and he's helping Mission Connections Southwest come to Arizona, which is a movement of churches partnering together to be a blessing to the nations. Jonathan, Liz, and Jake, thank you so much for taking time to come on the program today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Yeah, so grateful to have you guys with us today to talk about international students, Muslim international students. And I'm just kind of wondering, I'm sure that the COVID pandemic has impacted the availability of all international students, but I'm wondering, are there a lot of Muslims on university campuses these days? And why or why not?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the school. So most universities saw a really significant drop in international students when the pandemic hit. That was true at our school. Lots of students went home. So most universities are trying to rebuild that right now. We used to have tons of Saudi students at our university. The last few years, that's been less. But we do have lots of other Muslim students, so it changes over time. I would say that even if numbers have dropped, there still are international students on campus, and I think they're more hungry than ever for relationships while they're in the U.S. So even if a school nearby doesn't have a lot of students, the ones that are there are really wanting to meet people in our experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we saw a significant drop at ASU. I think we were running close to almost 15,000 pre-pandemic. And once COVID hit, it dropped down to, I want to say roughly 8,000. But this year we've definitely seen a spike back up of international students. Your question was more specific towards Muslims. I would say, yes, we've, from my observations, just driving around Tempe and driving around the school and the international students I've seen, it does seem like we've had less Muslims around. We've certainly seen a huge uptick of Indian international students, so that's been really sweet to see. But definitely it seems like we've had less Saudis and less, other Muslim countries represented at ASU at least. So yeah, it feels definitely like that.
So do you think it's related to the pandemic only, or are there other reasons that you could think of that why that might be dropping?
That's a good question, Nate. I would say, personally, I think it's primarily the pandemic. I mean, ASU has been historically running huge numbers of Muslim international students for years upon years upon years. And then, of course, once COVID hit, a number of them went back home right away, or even some of them finished out that semester and then just didn't come back. So I don't think that it's anything else besides the pandemic. So, but I'm open to hear from what others have to say on this one too.
I'm interested because I think I was on a campus tour with my daughter on the Seattle Pacific University campus, and they were saying that they had a drop of Saudi students because they had been outed as being too much of an evangelical campus, like it was too dangerous for the Saudis to go there, so they had kind of caused them to not consider that as a school anymore. So I was just wondering if you guys were experiencing that too.
I think we used to have higher numbers of Saudis at our university. I think the Saudi government shifted the way they were doing scholarships a few years ago and really focused on universities that were high in STEM programs. And so our university just isn't as much compared to others in Washington. So they send them to other ones in Washington State compared to ours. So that's the difference we've noticed. But
we still have a pretty good number of Saudi students at ASU. Now, what we have seen drop off is Kuwaiti students. The Kuwaiti government and ASU had a sweet partnership years ago, but something's changed in that one, and I'm not sure exactly all the details, but we certainly have seen less Kuwaitis. But Saudis, we're still seeing a good uptick. Of course, we're strong in the, like you'd mentioned, the STEM school. She's kind of strong in the engineering side of things, so that might be still part of it, but yeah.
So Jonathan and Liz, tell us a little bit about Chi Alpha. What are they hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, so our vision in Chi Alpha for all students, international or American, is the same. It's disciples making disciples who make disciples. And specifically for international students, we just believe that God has brought international students to the U.S. as part of that plan to make disciples of all nations. And a lot of people, when they think about international students, they think about, that's the harvest field that Jesus talked about, and that's true. We also are we really believe that international students are also the laborers for the harvest that Jesus told us to pray for. Mm-hmm. And so our dream is, we call it friendship to leadership. So our relationships with international students always start with friendship, and we pray that God will use us to help them develop into Jesus-centered leaders. And when they go home, it's just amazing. International students have the ability to plant churches in regions of the world that we can't as Americans. And they already speak the language, understand the culture. The Word of God comes alive through them. It's just amazing. And, not that we stop sending workers overseas, but it's an incredible missed opportunity if we don't introduce international students to Jesus and develop them as leaders before they go home. So that's really our vision for international students in particular.
Yeah, so this is kind of similar question for Jake. I mean, how does the Central Christian Church view its mission amongst Muslim students?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say Central a number of years ago just adopted this concept and mentality of we need to love them. We need to love them and welcome them. And I'm talking about specific Muslims in general. And so, yeah, I want to say about 15 years ago, our lead pastor just kind of went the opposite direction that a lot of other of our people in our culture were headed towards. There's obviously a stereotype there, and so he said, no, we need to love these guys. We need to love them well. And so a number of years ago, we started partnering with a great organization called International Students Incorporated, ISI. They're big on ASU's campus, and so we just started saying, hey, let's welcome them into our homes and let's share the gospel with them. Let's be culturally relevant as well as we do it. And so again, probably 15, 16 years ago, a number of us started just inviting them into our homes and doing hikes and doing camping trips and doing different events to just love on them. And then, of course, we want to introduce them to Jesus as well through relationship and through conversation and through, demonstrating and declaring the gospel. And so that's really been the heartbeat that we've strived for. And we've got a number of other churches that are also trying to do this as well, which has been exciting.
Cool. So when you are engaging with Muslims in the mix of international students, I know that there's people that are not Muslim and they're from all different backgrounds, right? And how do you find that doing ministry in a collective group like that works? Do you find that you need to segregate groups so that you're working with them separately, or do you find that you are able to minister or do activities with the whole group well? How does that work?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. One of the things that we decided to do a few years ago was to come alongside the university and also the international students and provide English language conversation groups. As you know, Saudis come here speaking pretty good English. But what we found when we started working with the Saudis is that they really wanted to practice even more, and they really felt like they needed to improve their skills. And so we launched what we called English conversation groups, is what it was, about 3 years ago. And we started seeing one year, I think it was our first year in, we saw 30 Saudis step into these different groups. And we were just blown away because historically our success in working and connecting with Saudis hadn't been so good. They'd been very friendly, but really a little bit more kind of guarded, I would say. But when we started providing a service, if you will, or like a free English language class that they could step into and just practice their conversation skills, it just did, like, our groups filled up. We ran these for 7 weeks, and we would have anywhere from 2 to 3 leaders per group, and 2 to 3 Americans, that is, just helping to facilitate. And we'd have anywhere from 6 to 8 Saudis, and we would allow other countries represented as well in these groups. Anyway, we saw great things, lots of good conversations, and more than anything, they knew we were serving them, and that was really sweet. So that's kind of one example of us kind of working together collectively as a group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my answer to your question would be it depends, again, on the student. I think I found that it helps to engage with students in their natural friendship networks, wherever those are. And so for a lot of Muslim students, they're really embedded in their friend group is the other Muslim international students on campus. And so they're not interested in doing a Bible study with international students from Japan or China or other places. Other times, the Muslim students, their friend group is kind of mixed. They have a lot of close friends who are also those East Asian internationals. And so depending on who they know, usually students are bringing their friends and doing things with their friends. Anyway, that's, a lot of how our groups grow is because they're inviting their friends. And so it sort of happens naturally one way or the other, depending on who the students are connected with. I think, Liz, you probably experienced with the women in particular, they tended to be probably less integrated with other internationals. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, when I interacted with other women, it was really like groups of Saudi women with me or maybe one other American woman. And my ministry to them was really separate from the other, like, other things that we would do, like our larger group Bible study for international students, because it was mixed gender. And so the women, like Saudi women, I don't know if we ever had a Saudi woman come to one of those things. They're just, they're more comfortable in groups with other women. I was going to add too with, in terms of the guys though, like they would, come to the larger group Bible studies and interact with like American students. I think for a lot of Muslim students, like Jonathan was saying, I think it depends on the student, but I think there's value in the large group Bible study and the mix of students from other cultures and other worldviews, and that discussion around scripture and having students from different backgrounds come and share, their thoughts on scripture, from like the varied backgrounds, but then also a lot of the ministry that we do happens in the one-on-one setting, or like maybe a couple students and us too. So I think for those settings, we try to have like maybe a couple students from a similar background or just one student, to get to like more personal questions that they might have, or like things that they could connect to in their heart more. So I think both the mix and just a personal conversation, both.
Yeah, I had a friend from Libya one time, and you wouldn't expect that he would necessarily mix well with all the different other international students, but he wound up being the Pied Piper of Hamlin. He would bring all of the international students to the group. He had made friends among every different people group, and so you just can't guess in advance how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's so true, and I've noticed that with a number of different groups where field-based missiology might tell us, oh, all these people are going to stay separate, and then they come to school or they come to business, and everybody just kind of mixes up. What role do you think hospitality plays or should play in reaching out to international students?
I'll jump in on that one. I think it plays every single piece of role. I mean, it is the role. It's so crucially important, and that's in a lot of ways why we've actually purposely bought a house in the midst of where thousands of international students live, is so we can just invite them over for dinner, or they invite us over for dinner, or that is the because again, they come from such solidly warm, hospitable countries. And then they come here, and the average American's is just too busy for them, and is not inviting them in. And I think in a lot of ways they crave the wanting to be part of American culture, at least meeting Americans and getting to know them and finding out more about American culture. And so when we can do that, invite them in for a dinner, dessert, you name it, go play games, whatever. Go to the park even, and just invite them over to the park and hang out and do games at the park. We've done that a number of times and had some great wins from that. So, but yeah, hospitality is crucially important.
Yeah, we agree. We've been nodding the whole time that you've been talking, Jake. We feel exactly the same way.
Yeah, it was a soft pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. Thanks, Brian. That was awesome.
Anything I can do to make y'all look good.
There's I can tell a fun story about one student we were having to our home several times for dinner. I think maybe we'd only had him over a couple of times. He was from Bangladesh, and I remember driving him home from our house one night. This is when Liz was pregnant, and he asked me, like, Jonathan, what is Liz's blood type? And I was like, why do you ask? Because that's an unusual question.
Right.
And I had like given blood that day, and so I was like, oh, he's probably asking because he saw that I gave blood today. And so I went into this whole like, oh, well, here's how blood donation works in America, and blah blah blah. And he goes, well, I'm asking because in my country, like when someone's going to give birth, like their family, like will make sure that they all give blood if they match their blood type, so that there's blood in reserve in case anything goes wrong in the childbirth. And I realized he was like hoping that he had the same blood type as Liz, so that he could offer his own blood in case anything went wrong in childbirth. And I thought, man, a lot of people brought us a meal, but nobody had ever offered like to give us their own blood in case anything went wrong. And like that's how thankful he was that we had him over to our home, because nobody else had done that. He was like, there's got to be some way that I can pay you back for all this hospitality you've shown me. So it meant a lot to him. It really does mean a lot to a student.
So you're saying the hospitality goes both directions, and sometimes it can get awkward.
yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Oh man, that's an extreme story. That's awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
So when a lot of Muslims in their home countries are, we think of Muslims generally as being resistant to the gospel, and I wonder sometimes if when they are away from home, I wonder sometimes I think they could become more resistant to the gospel because they're in a threatening environment or something, or maybe because they're away from home, it could be that they can let their hair down a little bit and kind of be a little bit more open to the gospel. What has been your guys' experience about Muslims in the U.S. As students?
In my experience, I felt that it's really actually so easy to have spiritual conversations with Muslim students. And especially because we reach out to students from lots of other different countries, so we have a lot to compare it to. I think that Muslims, they just have their minds and hearts kind of like attuned to that and the spiritual world in ways that students maybe from other places don't. And so it's just so easy to talk with students about faith and about God and even about Jesus. And yeah, I find that when I interact with a Muslim woman, I find that I have more in common with her sometimes than I do with maybe like my American neighbor, like my American next door neighbor, just because we have a similar worldview and a similar set of values. And so we approach like our decision making and our thoughts on how, the world works based on, we believe that there's one God, and we believe that God is worth following and obeying and listening to. We believe even that God is a loving God. We have so many things in common about how we view the world that it's so much easier to have those conversations, and that there's so much common ground that it's actually surprising, because on the outside, like, our lives don't look very similar at all. But internally there's a lot that's similar. So yeah, I found it's like the easiest ground for me.
Wow. That's good. I found in a lot of ways very similar to what you're saying, Liz. It's easy to enter into conversations and bring up and, share your faith or get into conversations. We call it sharing salty statements, where you're just trying to, salt the conversation and add flavor to it. by dropping in spiritual, connotations and that kind of thing, letting people know you're a spiritual person. So I've found that they're generally are receptive to that. I think when we have bridged the gap into trying to get Muslims, especially Saudis, into what we call discovery Bible studies, that's been a little bit more of a challenge. We have had some success of getting them into a Bible study, but then there's usually some barriers that they have to overcome to keep going in the study. So there's certainly been some positive conversations, but once you kind of get into trying to read scripture, there's been definitely some barriers. Now, I will say, by the grace of God, we did have one Saudi gal come to faith last year, and that was really sweet.
Wow.
We had been walking with her for a number of months and getting into a study, and she leaned in and then kind of leaned back. Over the course of a few months, she was really excited and kind of pulled back, and then came back to us again and was really interested in learning more about Jesus. And I remember one day she called up my wife and said, "Hey, I think I'm ready to accept Jesus. Can I come talk to you about this?" And my wife's like, "Yes, come on over right now." And she ended up getting baptized, and so that was really encouraging. That was the first Saudi that we'd seen come to faith in all the years that we'd been reaching Saudis. So yeah, I think there's certainly an openness at times that, especially with the pandemic, that I think there's just a stirring, personally, in some people's hearts.
Yeah.
So when we talk about ministry amongst different groups of migrants, I mean, students certainly represent a huge portion of this, and each group represents different, opportunities and different challenges. And one thing with students is they're here on, short-term visas, and so at some point it's expected they either have to, jump visas or go back home. And I know students do both things, but let's talk about the students that go home for a second. Are you hearing anything from students, particularly maybe those who are believers, when they go back to their home country? Is there anything that you would think that helps you see that your ministry is having a global impact?
I think, I wish I knew more. Communication is tricky a lot of the time once they go home. But I was thinking about like one of Liz's good friends who, after she left, her little brother came to study at our university. And I remember she called Liz kind of out of the blue and said, like, "Hey, my brother's coming and you need to take care of him. we need you to take care of him." And the fact that she, called us first, this American Christian family, and said, I'm going to entrust my little brother to you, was significant. I think that had become like we were people that she could trust with someone that she cared about. I mean, I remember the first time I met with him, we went to the coffee shop and she called him and said, "Put Jonathan on the phone because I want to check in on how you're eating and how everything is going." She was an oldest child, and
of course.
But so she was very she really was quite protective of him, and that the fact that she trusted us was significant. And I think even that alone, when I think about students being in their home country, and the fact that a follower of Jesus is somebody trustworthy, somebody that I could entrust my family member to. That was a huge shift in her experience of life. She'd never known followers of Jesus before she came to the States. And so when I think about what that even could do in her family and in, her and her husband's extended families, if they started thinking of Jesus and his people that way, that has huge effects long-term, potentially.
We haven't seen a number of people who've actually come to faith here actually head back home.
I see.
The majority of the students that we've seen come to faith are actually still here. So we had a gentleman from India who went on to get his PhD. It was really sweet. We started walking with him, and he just kind of walked right into the kingdom and baptized him in the bottom of the Grand Canyon in the Colorado River. It was really sweet baptism. But he ended up getting a job as a professor here at one of the universities. I recently, it's probably been 3 or 4 years now, was able to walk with an Iranian who had come here as an international student. He's still actually studying. He had come to faith, but he's still here. He actually got asylum because going back to Iran would basically could be a death sentence for him. So he's actually studying here, and then we had that Saudi gal recently come to faith, and she's still here. So we've certainly ministered to a number of international students who've gone back home, but I would say the majority of the international students that we've ministered who are back home haven't said yes to Jesus quite yet. So,
just a quick follow-up question: have any of your students given you or any of your teammates invitations to come to their home country?
All the time.
Because I think that's a huge area of exploration that we haven't really taken a deep dive in, is this opportunity of, we connect here and then get to go back home with them in some capacity or another.
That's right.
My question is, have you gone back? Have you gone with them when you got your invitation?
That would be our dream of dreams, would just be to take a year to travel the world and visit all of our former international students. We would love that. No, we haven't gone to visit any international students. We did get to go to Jordan, and we visited one of our Jordanian students who came as a Christian already, and so we got to visit his family while we were in Jordan, which was really special. But yeah, we'd like to.
we do have a standing invitation to Mecca itself, because we actually hosted a student from Mecca in our home for a year, and so he said anytime we want to go, we can stay with him. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I certainly have had a number of invitations as well, but just like Jonathan and Liz, it's just haven't been able to carve out that time and space. Yep. Love to do it though.
So, I'm sure that there are, listeners out there who are engaging with Muslims in their settings and might be feeling like it's just really hard. And so I'm wondering if you guys have, just to make them feel like they're part of the greater community and suffering together, can you maybe share some of the things that you've struggled with or obstacles that you're facing in your ministry?
A couple of things come to mind for me. One, if anyone out there is also reaching out to international students in particular, all of our routines on campus have been upended. Everything's reshuffled. I used to know where and when to find the students, and I don't know anymore because we were off campus for a year. I don't know where they eat lunch yet. So it's just taking me a long time this year to even find the students, and I'm learning to be okay with the fact that it's going to be slower. And so if that's anybody out there and you just feel like it's taking a long time, that's okay. I think we're all finding that. And I think too, we're often just in the life of an international student for a very short window. It's a really crucial time of their life when they're kind of deciding who they're going to be and what they're going to believe and what their life is going to be about, but it's very short. And so, similar to what Jake was saying, we rarely see a student come here, meet a follower of Jesus for the first time, and go all the way to deciding to totally upend their life and follow Jesus too. It's slow work, and it's shifting of worldviews, and we're asking a lot of students when we ask them that, and so it's going to take time for them to make those decisions. And I've definitely had students who have gone home and only decided to follow Jesus years later. And when they left here, we had no idea where they were at spiritually. And so a lot of times you don't think that you're making an impact, or you just have no idea long term the seeds that you're planting, what is going to bear fruit and what isn't. You just don't know. Right. And you have to keep faithfully going ahead anyway, even if you don't know what the results are going to be.
Ministering to women in particular, I think a lot of women from many Muslim cultures feel really isolated. And I'm not sure if it's the same when they're here as maybe an immigrant, but at least for the students that I interact with as international students, they are here usually with a brother or maybe their husband or another male family member. And then that is like really the only person that they know when they come here and they go to class and then they go home. And their male like family member that's here with them gets to go out and meet other people and develop friendships, and they have like a very small relational circle while they're here of their brother or husband and maybe a few other women from the country that they're from who are also here. And so any interaction that they could have with someone that would take the time to interact with them is so significant. And so I think for someone who might be feeling like discouraged or feeling like, could I possibly make an impact? I think going out to coffee with a Muslim woman just speaks volumes in terms of like filling up their relational bucket. Because if you think about like the cultures that they come from, they're surrounded by people all of the time. And then they come here and they feel really lonely and isolated. And so just giving some of your time, which is something we all have to give. You don't have to be like an expert on, reaching Muslims or the differences between the Quran and the Bible or whatever. Like you don't have to know really a lot. You just have to give your time and your care and your friendship, and that means a lot to a Muslim woman. And then from that, like within that time that you guys spend together, I think conversations are significant, shared life. And I was thinking about, I was at a coffee shop with a friend once, and I don't remember how we were talking about this, but we started talking about Noah. Maybe I was reading about Noah that morning or something. I don't know. And I asked her, like, what do you know about Noah from the Quran? And she told me the story of Noah. And then she was like, and what do you know about Noah from the Bible? Like she was really curious. And so we got to share that, Another time that the same friend started telling me about a dream that she had. And I have heard this was when I was really new to reaching out to Muslims. And so many people said to me, dreams are really important to Muslims. So if they talk about dreams, you should ask them about it. And Jesus can really speak to Muslims in dreams. And so she started telling me about her dream, and I was like, it wasn't anything super significant, but I got to ask her, what do you think it means? And she just opened up about this really personal thing that she felt this dream meant to her. And so, yeah, I think just having friendships and asking about their life is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. One of the things that's really encouraged us lately here in the Phoenix area is we've had some recent arrivals of Afghan refugees. And obviously, these are just recent from the latest situation over there. And about 35 of them that have been kind of just settled. And when I say settled, they're in temporary housing for now until we can get them into long-term housing. So it's just a transitional situation. But they've been in this particular location for about 5 weeks. And so our missional community has just been able to go over there and spend time serving them meals and befriending them. And just, it's been a really sweet time for us to connect with them. Obviously, they're in tons of pain, and it's a very traumatic situation for them. And I trust that traumas still need to be worked through, and there's lots of healing that needs to happen. So don't want to over glorify it because it's good for us by any means, but just simply trying to say, like, it's been a sweet time for us as a community to love on these people who've gone through so much. And so there's been some good conversations that have taken place. And, obviously these kinds of things take time as far as seeing them say yes to Jesus and all that. But we've just really seen the value of coming alongside these Afghan refugees. And as the United States is going to be receiving, hopefully, it looks like thousands upon thousands upon thousands. Here in Arizona, I think we're going to receive 1,600. So 35 is just a few compared to how many more we're going to be receiving. But so that's kind of put some wind in our sails recently, and certainly has been a blessing to us, and I hope we're being a blessing to them.
Yeah. So we know times have been crazy, and sounds like y'all have had massive changes in your ministry, and I know it's easy to kind of get bogged down into how do we dig ourselves out of what we're currently in, but I'm sure you've got some great stories as well, whether it's, during pandemic or before pandemic. And so we love to close on a story. So tell us one of your favorite stories, something that just puts a smile on your face and reminds you why you do this.
I'll tell you one. This was a few years ago. This was when we were hosting that student from Saudi Arabia in our home. And so because he was, part of our family, all the Saudi students knew who we were. And so I'm sitting on campus one time, just eating my lunch, and the Saudi guy comes and sits at the table with me. I've never seen this guy before. But he sits down and he says, "Hey, Muhammad told me that you are a Christian and that you work for a Christian group. So is it your job to make everybody a Christian?" And I was, terrified about how to answer that question. But I told him, well, I love Jesus, and Jesus has revealed God to me. And so I guess you could say it's my job to tell everybody about Jesus. And he said, okay. And he sat with me. We ended up talking for like a couple of hours, and we were just talking about his life. And every time he would bring up these questions, I would just tell him a story about Jesus, because I said, well, it's my job to tell people about Jesus, so let me tell you a story about Jesus. And it was just amazing. Like, he would ask, he asked about some natural disaster had just happened. He said, do you think God is judging those people? And I said, well, there's actually a story where Jesus healed a man who was blind. He saw a blind man, and he asked his disciples, or his disciples asked, who sinned that made him be born blind? And Jesus said, actually, that God's glory might be displayed in his life. And maybe sometimes God uses bad things to display his glory. And he was just amazed, like, wow, I can't believe that Jesus would say that. Or I told him one of my favorite stories to tell Saudi students is about Jesus's, how he called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, that they look good on the outside, but they're dead inside. And he says, oh, I know exactly the kind of person that Jesus is talking about. I see that all the time. And it just for like a couple of hours, I just remember sitting there and just thinking, this is what it was like when Jesus was here, like walking around, healing people, teaching and proclaiming the good news. People were amazed. They would say, what kind of man is this? And that was this student's reaction every time I would tell him a story about Jesus. And I remember just walking away from that conversation, loving Jesus more and being more amazed by Jesus. And I have so many stories like that, because these students they get it. When they hear the story about Jesus, they actually get it. And I love being able to tell stories about Jesus to students. It's just an incredible privilege to get to do that for someone for the very first time.
My story that comes to mind is similar. I remember a time when we were having a Bible study with at one of our students' homes, and there was probably like 6 or so small groups of students kind of sitting around in circles around the room. And we were all reading a passage of scripture and like talking about it, having discussion questions. I don't even remember the passage that we were talking about, but it was a parable that Jesus told. And this was happening in another group, so I was kind of overhearing what was going on. One of our student leaders was asking, so we're going to read a story about Jesus. Do you guys know who Jesus was? And there was a Muslim student there from Saudi who it was his first time at our Bible study. And just immediately his eyes lit up and he goes, "Oh yes, I love Jesus." And he said it so loud because he was so enthusiastic about it that it kind of made the whole room just stop. We all heard it. And there was this awkward silence. The Muslim student just said that he loves Jesus, But kind of similar to what Jonathan was saying, I feel it's such a pleasure to be able to talk to students who have a concept of Jesus that is really different from what American students have of him, and just they have a respect and an interest that's there, that it's just fun to be able to shape that and to tell them about who Jesus is, and for them to be able to round out their view of who Jesus is from what we tell them, and for them to watch the light bulbs go off of oh, this is who he is, and to see those kind of connections being made is such a joy and a pleasure for us.
That's great.
And that's a story we tell a lot. We do trainings for students, to how to reach out to Muslims, and it's just a fun story to tell because it's so unexpected that a Muslim student would say, "I love Jesus," but it's true.
That's awesome. We had one that's a really exciting story, and it's going to sound like it kind of contradicts my previous point of I don't really know that many who've gone back home. This is actually a gal that came and lived with us for a couple of weeks. She was in a program with the community colleges. So part of the program was she come here, stayed with the host family for a couple of weeks, really get to know the host family, but then moves off and lives in an apartment with a number of other international students at the community college. So we got to know her, and it was just a sweet kind of building of a relationship. And over the course of several months, just of inviting her into our home and her seeing our life, the way we interact with our kids and the way my wife and I interact, she just was intrigued, and she started asking questions, and we eventually invited her into this Bible study we were doing. She joined it, and it was sweet. She started asking lots of questions, and eventually, about the last month she was here, she basically asked my wife to baptize her, and so she was baptized, and now she's back in North Africa and is living out her faith. She genuinely just loves Jesus, and it's a challenging situation for her in the sense that if her uncles or some of her family members find out, it could be pretty bad for her in this part of the country. This part of the world there's still honor killings and these kinds of things. So she has to keep it fairly, she's got to be wise in who she shares with. But she just, loves Jesus, and my wife and her still talk on a regular basis. And so anyway, we're actually hoping to go see her when we do. We're planning a trip to North Africa ourselves here, and we'll hope to spend some time with her. So it's kind of a fun one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Jonathan, Liz, and Jake, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was sweet.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I would definitely say that your stories put a smile on my face too, so I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Medina Podcast. This show is hosted by Brian Hebert and produced by Nate Schultz. The conversations we have on this program are born out of an expanding environment of collaboration among grassroots ministry practitioners across the North American continent. If you would like to engage on a deeper level, please email us at medinafocus@vision59.com.